Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrishSportsDaily.com. I am your host, Greg Flammang, and joining me in just a little bit is going to be the John Brice from the Football Scoop. He's going to talk to us about Notre Dame's the personnel symposium that he attended in Nashville, Tennessee over the last week, talking about how to identify undervalued players. Got a lot of info from that. We're going to talk to him about that. We're going to talk to him about Notre Dame's quarterbacks. We're going to talk to him about Notre Dame's wide receivers and all other things that are going on with fall camp. It is Friday, August 8th. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. If you like what you hear, please hit the like button. Please hit subscribe. Please hit the notification bell so whenever it is we are going live. Links to the podcast are in the description below. And as always, the show is brought to you by ESQ Clothing, founded by Notre Dame alum Ge Wang, and Chicago's go-to for the best custom suits, shirts, and sport coats. As Notre Dame reloads for the season, now's the time to refresh your wardrobe and add the perfect suit, sport coat, tuxedo, or casual jacket for fall. ESQ's master tailors combine next-level craftsmanship with the finest fabrics to deliver a fit that's built just for you. Now with showrooms both downtown Chicago and in Winnetka, book your custom fitting at esqclothing.com and step into confidence with Chicago's finest. Mention ISD at your appointment and get 10% off your entire purchase. esqclothing.com. Before John pops in here, I do want to talk a little bit about Notre Dame's practice on Wednesday, which saw them have a red zone period. So there were a lot of I'll roll the kind of the practice clips that we got from that. But there was the beginning of the practice period that the media got to see, and at the end of this, you're going to see the wide receivers doing some red zone work on that. So in Wednesday's practice, we saw the offense go against the defense in the red zone, and Matt Freeman reported on IrishSportsDaily.com that the offense actually won this session in the red zone. Now, what that means that you're not really sure, but at least they were more successful, according to people who watched the scrimmage or watched the practice session, I should say, as the offense came out with the upper hand. Now, I think this is notable for a couple of reasons. A, we had heard earlier in camp that the defense was getting the upper hand on the offense early on. Now, this was expected, right? Jamie talked about this in our last Hit and Hustle on Tuesday. The defense is always going to be ahead of the offense, specifically in this type of situation where you have a very veteran defense and you have an offense with new quarterbacks, whether it's Mincchi or Carr. These were not the regular quarterbacks last year. So while they have Notre Dame's offense has a bunch of here's the red zone routes we're watching right now. This is Micah Gilbert here. Even though you have guys like Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and a veteran offensive line, Eli Raridan, and the wide receivers we see here with Jordan Faison and Malachi Fields, who we're going to talk a lot about later. Even though you have that, you still have a situation where it's a new quarterback room and you have a very good defense. And so the defense has got the upper hand early on in camp. We heard about offense got the upper hand in red zone. What does that mean? First of all, for the offensive point of view, Notre Dame was very, very successful in the red zone last year because of Riley Leonard and his legs and the threat that he brought to things. He scored so many touchdowns inside the red zone. He was almost an automatic as a runner in that area of the field. So there was a question about how good Notre Dame can be in the red zone when Riley Leonard isn't a part of the equation, right? You still have the running ability of Mincchi. You have some running ability with Carr. But Notre Dame needs to be able to get the ball into the end zone from the red zone. It's one of the biggest keys to being a very good, A, offensive football team, and B, being just like a winning football team, period. So that's something that you need to see from your offense. They were able to do that against, one of the better defenses that Notre Dame is going to face throughout the entire year. On the defensive side of it, right now, we saw Al Golden struggle in the red zone in his first season at Notre Dame in 2022. They were literally the worst red zone team in terms of conversion rate for touchdowns in college football. They were 135 out of 135 or whatever it was. That's something that needs to be obviously worked out. Matt noted in his practice report that the red zone and the way teams play red zone defense in the NFL is different than what it happens or the way it works in college football. So that's something that that Chris Ash needs to get worked out. It's something that he needs to experiment with and figure out the best way for his defense to get off the field when they're in the red zone. So that's something that is interesting to monitor. Another thing that I think is interesting about that we talked a lot about, or I talked a lot about on Wednesday, and I want to kind of touch on again, and I didn't bring up the linebackers as much, is we saw Jalen Stroman running with the first team, an individual, right? But sometimes that stuff is correlated with how the practice is going. We saw Jalen Stroman running with the first team. We saw Jaylen Sneed coming out with the ones at will linebacker. And I think that's notable in the sense that it has always been my assumption, and I've talked about this a bunch, that KVA would eventually pass him up for that number one will linebacker spot, play next to the Mike, who has been Drake Bowen, who is going to be one of the leaders of the defense. The fact that Jaylen Sneed is still running with the ones shows me that this transformation that he's going through from kind of a utility player to a sub-package player to a full-time linebacker, I think is real, and I think it continues to happen. Notre Dame would not put him out there if that was not the case, right? And so, to be clear, anytime you make a prediction like someone is going to, get passed up in the lineup, I'm talking about Jaylen Sneed and KVA. There's a kind of, I don't want to say an assumption, but there's a thought that, I'm then therefore rooting for KVA to take the job. That is not the case, right? I would be totally fine if Jaylen Sneed was the person who ran out there with the ones in every single game, because I think that's good for him. He was a former 5-star. It's not like he doesn't come with any sort of pedigree, right? He obviously does. So these are 2 5-star linebackers, competing for time. It's a good point by someone in the chat here. Let me find it if I can. So this is what happens when I am not just producing. I'm talking while producing. The point was made that KVA will still get plenty of snaps, and I 100% agree with that. KVA will get on the field plenty in 2025. But I just wanted to note Jaylen Sneed still playing good football, still playing as well as he ever has. That portends well for the defense, right? Anytime you can get an upperclassman out there, a senior in somewhat of a contract year, right? He would like to move on to the NFL. This is a huge season for him in terms of his, after Notre Dame prospects. So wanted to touch on that stuff on the opening, get a bit of an intro, to set up the show and what we're going to talk about. Right now, I would like to welcome on the John Brice of the Football Scoop. Thank you, John, for joining me again. You were here recently. People love when you come on the show. You're recently back from the personnel symposium that took place in Nashville, Tennessee, your old stomping grounds over there. So I want to touch on that too. And for people, you wrote an article about this that is running on Football Scoop right now. It's called Secrets to Identifying Undervalued Players. That on Insight you picked up from the personnel symposium. That link to that article is linked in the description below. So you're going to find that in the description of this video. John, tell me all about that and what you gleaned from this, because I think you were very excited to talk about it.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Appreciate the invitation as always, and not done with our coverage at Football Scoop from the Personnel Symposium. I would say the number one thing I gleaned from it is that the future of the sport, in particular, the future of staffing the sport of college football, was on display. I went to this was my third one I attended, but I missed the last couple of years, so this was my first since 2022. In 2022, I think there were between 300 and 400 people there, which is a large number. This year, there were over 1,100 people there. They had NFL GMs there. They had NFL assistant GMs, senior scouts, directors of scouting, college general managers, college DPPs, ADPs, you name it. It was huge. It was a who's who of the personnel world, both collegiate, especially collegiate, but also at the NFL level. A ton of NFL representation there. And then also virtually every agency of note was there. from NIL agents to coaches agents to NFL player reps, you name it. It was deep with people that are in the business of football, especially the business of college football. So the undervalued identifying players was really interesting. As the story notes, Braden Fisk was one of them and had some video that I unfortunately couldn't get to embed in the story, but it was the Rams director of scouting was one of the presenters along with the assistant GM from the University of Cincinnati. And the Rams, they had pulled out old film of Braden Fisk as a guard for his Michigan City high school team as an offensive guard and showed him. And you could see some things. And it was really interesting to hear the discussion in the room from the personnel experts about the things they saw, even when he was on that high school film as a guard, that they thought would allow him to be a potential defensive lineman. Nobody in there tried to claim that they knew he would be, on the NFL all-rookie team for how well he played in 2024.
For sure.
But the traits they identified then with Kadarius Toney were really interesting. Certainly Rashawn Slater, you could see he was a nice-looking offensive tackle in high school coming out of Sugar Lands, Texas, but he still ended up at Northwestern, which is obviously a great school, but you wonder how a guy like that gets out of the Lone Star State, and now he's the highest-paid offensive lineman in NFL history. So just some really neat things in that regard, some characteristics that they continue to look for to this day in players. So those are, from that particular session, those are a lot of the standout moments.
Yeah, and when I think of so I'm looking at your article now, and they talked in the symposium about football character. And you want to meet, kind of check these boxes, right? And listed under that is competitive spirit, mental toughness, physical toughness, dependability, passion for the game, and self-efficacy. And so this is what college evaluators or pro evaluators or whoever it might be, they're looking for prospects to check these boxes, right? And so that is aside from their physical ability and their physical talent, right? And so this is kind of the portion of it that fans don't have any insight to because they simply cannot, right? We, as fans and as people, like me who evaluate prospects on film, we can't gauge any of these, bits of football character. When I think of a player who fits this for Notre Dame, I think of Donovan Heinisch, right? He seems to me to fit all of these kind of traits here. And you look at him and you would say, well, he's not exactly, the physical specimen that you want, the body type that you want. But then you bring him into your program, you can count on him. You know what you're going to get out of him. And now he's sacking the Georgia quarterback to end the Sugar Bowl and send Notre Dame on to the semifinals of the college football playoff. Is this where Notre Dame is looking to go with a lot of their support staff and just not just Notre Dame, but all college football teams, just kind of build out more of this where you can evaluate players on a kind of an off-field level?
Yeah, I like the Donovan Heinisch example. I would contend maybe Anthony Knapp in that example as well, for sure, if you wanted one on each side of the ball. I think there's no question that Notre Dame has deployed more of an NFL model. I've talked about it pretty candidly on various platforms. I believe that very strongly. It starts at the top with the hiring of Mike Martin, and then it goes down from there with even bringing on Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa. And as you guys well know at ISD, there have been rave reviews on the impact of MTA and what he's doing in recruiting. But he's a guy who also played the game at an incredibly high level. And so, every person that I talked to down there has talked about the NFLization of college football, and we've seen it from, Florida's new general manager, Ron Polk, spent like 18 years with the Falcons. You've got Jim Nagy now at Oklahoma, who was an NFL guy, and then the director of the Senior Bowl. There's another gentleman out there, Kevin Kelly at Clemson. I spent some time with him. He's actually quoted in that story there that you referenced, but he was a longtime NFL guy. He helped them draft not only Rashawn Slater, but also helped them draft Joe Alt to the Chargers. So that the NFL model is not only coming to college, in a lot of ways it's already at college. Maybe the most interesting point that was made to me, Greg, was multiple people said they think coaches' staffs will remain as is or shrink some, even though the NCAA has peeled back some of those limitations, and personnel staffs will continue to grow. And for me, like 2 events that I do every year in addition to the AFCA convention are the National Directors of Football Operations Conference in early May, and then this Personnel Symposium. I do it more years than not. And the DFO conference in Texas in early May helps me do my job better for the entire year.
Yeah.
But the size has stayed about the same. You know, there were 300 to 400 people there this year. You got triple that basically at this Personnel Symposium, and that tells you where the money's being spent in college football departments as well. And one other quick note on the football character, and I appreciate you reading those specific traits out because it reminds me of something a longtime NFL scout who's now a college GM told me, and that is when he was scouting the NFL, if they were looking at a running back or a skill player like that who often had the ball in his hands, he would go through all of his cut-ups for the season and chart how many times he ran out of bounds rather than picking up a few extra yards. And obviously he had some variables in that, you know, if he's running out of bounds to kill the clock, it wasn't a mark against him. But it just shows you the detail that these guys and girls now are looking at in depth for evaluating these players. And I imagine a detail like that is something that's becoming more and more examined in college recruiting as well.
Yeah. Kairen Williams, mentioning running backs. I mean, he's one that just kind of jumps off the screen, right? Like sometimes you can get insight into the character of a player by watching their tape. I think Kairen Williams is one of those players. And obviously, he got the 3-year extension just this week with the Rams. And I noted at the time, I believe it was Autry Denson who kind of prioritized him over Ches Malusi, who was a higher ranked prospect who ended up at Clemson, then ended up at Wisconsin. Obviously, going with Kairen Williams, that worked out really well for Notre Dame, worked out really well for the Rams. So that's good stuff. So, like you said, look out for continuing coverage on the Football Scoop on the Personnel Symposium and what you found there. And you can check out his article as well. That's linked in the description. So
yeah, the only quick thing I would add from the symposium that's specific to the coverage upcoming is there were a ton of meetings about contract negotiations for college players, basically the salary cap for college athletes and how many players are getting paid on rosters around the country. And so, for example, Nebraska's GM, another guy, longtime NFL veteran who just got to the Cornhuskers earlier this year, he admitted in a huge public forum that Nebraska is paying 92 players on its roster. 92 players on its roster are making money above scholarship.
Yeah, that side of it is like so fascinating because it's still a moving target. Even though we've had the House settlement, there were lawsuits that came from that, and as to what the what the clearinghouse can actually, how much are they going to be able to limit what the contracts are because of different types of rules and that sort of thing. And there's been lawsuits there, and there's been amendments. Now collectives can still be a much bigger part than I think even we thought a month ago.
For sure.
So it's such a moving target. So everyone just keep out for John's reporting on that. The Football Scoop does some of the best stuff on that specific topic. So that's something that everyone wants to keep attention to. Buddy Mitchell, thank you for the super chat. Love Greg and JB, 2 of the best. We're humbled to bring JB onto our show. Let's say that.
Come on, man. I love it. You guys, I had dinner with your colleague Jamie this week as soon as I got back from Nashville, along with Matt Freeman and Mike Frank. So you guys are just some of the flat out best dudes in the business covering any team, let alone Notre Dame here where I live.
Appreciate you. Pops McGee is in the chat. He knows he hasn't been here. He apparently recently lost his father. Prayers up to you, Pops. That's a tough time for anyone to go through, but wanted to mention him because he's been on the show from the very beginning. He's always here, hasn't been around. He's going through some stuff. Keep your head up, Pops. Hope things can turn around for you. There was a question in here about Preston Zinter. I wanted to get to that really quickly from Beef Eater ND08. Can we ask John Brice about how Preston Zinter's move from the linebacker to D-line is going? Me and Jamie have always been pretty high on him. It was one of those things where does he fit in the linebacker room because of the influx of talent that Notre Dame has. We thought he was a good football player. He's moved to the D-line. Do you have any insight into how he's matriculated over there?
His best bet is to be a rotational player this year. I would note he's up to 240, and I remember even Mike Mickens talking about him last year that they were able to sink Zent, as he called him, into some coverage stuff. And so I think that gives you an idea of his athleticism, because that was literally last August that Mick was talking about that. And so, look, he's not going to be the third or fourth guy, but I think he'll be a core four special teams guy, and then he'll also have some moments to start positioning himself for a greater role in the future. So right now it's a transitional period for him. We haven't seen enough practice really to say he's done well or he's not done well. I have heard him be complimented in some of the indie drills that we're around for, and just for his get off on the ball, his ability to take coaching, and the way that he's pursuing trying to get better.
I think a similar move you could kind of point to is junior Chili Halamaka, who went from linebacker to D end. And that was one where I did not see the fit at all, just in terms of his skill set. And then obviously Notre Dame saw something there, because then he comes in and he's a very good football player for them at the then Viper, now just defensive end situation. So look, these things can happen. I'm sure that's what they told Preston Zinner. Like, hey, we saw it with Junior. We see it with you. Just stick with us. We got a plan for you. And it's, a term that's been thrown around a lot lately with Notre Dame football is proof of concept. Notre Dame has proof of concept with this because of what they saw from Junior Halamaka. So thank you for the question, Beef Eater. Let's talk about quarterbacks, John. I don't know if you've heard, there's a quarterback competition going on at the University of Notre Dame right now. I think that, there was preseason talk about who the favorite was and who we thought. Our stance on this show has always kind of been, let them get to camp and figure it out from there. We're in camp. Obviously, we haven't seen much. The first day of practice has been talked about a ton. What have you kind of heard since then, right? And I think now, today is what, the 8th? That now is when, in real time, moves are going to be made by one of these guys, and so we don't get the full view of it,
right.
But there's always talk around the team. What have you kind of heard about the quarterback situation?
Yeah, I was talking with people in the program yesterday, and I think it's maybe a Carr slight edge, but that it's probably a little bit more of a competition this deep into camp than what was expected. I think deep down, if you got people and they were truly candid with you over in the program, they would say they thought they would probably be able to name a starter by August 10th. I think that was the expectation now. And speaking with Tim O'Malley yesterday and some others, I think we're probably trending toward Notre Dame hoping to have it wrapped up by next Sunday, which is the end of fall camp. I think it's their final major scrimmage. Probably work, in the most game-like setting possible, including, I think, having ACC officials for that scrimmage. So I think that's significant. That sort of tells you that's the pinnacle moment of the camp portion, and then they'll shift to game mode after that. But the guys like Kenny Mincchi a lot, which doesn't mean they don't like CJ Carr, because CJ Carr has certainly, as it was described to me, he's got a presence about him. And I will share this note. I meant to tell it to some people yesterday, but at the personnel symposium, I was with a guy from the SEC, and he's been doing it about 6 or 7 years. And he told me CJ Carr was one of his all-time favorite quarterbacks that he ever evaled to recruit. And I thought that was pretty interesting, pretty telling when you hear that from a guy that has he's been experienced in places other than the SEC, but he's in the SEC now, and he felt that way. So I think that, again, is pretty telling. I think it comes down to trust. What have we heard more than anything, whether it's been from Mike Denbrock or Marcus Freeman, about how the number one thing that will determine who the starting quarterback is trust. I think there's still been some turnover issues, which is the good and the bad, because Tay Johnson didn't stop making interceptions on day one. As I was told, he's got maybe 4 picks now thus far in camp. So that tells you he's continuing to show up and make plays. I would also add Jalen Stroman is coming on strong. So I do think it's worth not being doom and gloom, because these guys, be it CJ Carr or Kenny Mincchi, aren't going to go against very many defenses over the balance of this season. as great as the one they're facing every single day in practice.
Do you think that people thought? I guess my question is: do you think Kenny Mincchi is? I don't want to say surprising them because I think they know he's a good football player, right? But do you think that is it a case of Kenny Mincchi is he's rising to the occasion? I mean, I'm sure it's some of that, but why do you think people are surprised that it hasn't been more clear recently? I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
I think that as it was shared with me, like when CJ Carr plays approaching his ceiling, like he just looks so elite and seems to have such a top end ceiling. But I'm not sure that either guy is playing an approach of his ceiling right now, is the way I would say it. So maybe they're here and they started here. They thought they might be all the way up to here by now, or that CJ Carr would be up to here by now, and they're still both just kind of right here. That's probably, if you were kind of bar charting it, how I would look at it. And so, and maybe it is pressing, trying to win the job. You wonder if one guy has named it, if he just takes off with it or whatever. And these coaches chart everything, and then they go back and look. And incomplete passes are not always incomplete passes that are charted on the quarterback, and I think that's important to note. I mean, CJ,
right? Positive and negative grades are kind of they're not reliant on the outcome.
Correct. And I think it's important to note, like, of the 3 picks he threw day one, the first was an awful decision. I mean, Tay Johnson just had to play center field, and it was a can of corn fly ball. The second pick was Tay Johnson making an unbelievable play, and then the third pick was a drop pass, and it hit the guy in the breadbasket. So that's a problem that's not on CJ Carr, but it looks like, oh, well, what a horrendous day. He bounced back from all of those and made really good decisions. And even on day one, he had a brilliant throw on a sideline out to Jeremiah Love coming out of the slot, and then he hit Micah Gilbert on the opposite sideline deep downfield for what was either a 40-yard gain or might have ultimately been a touchdown if it wasn't a practice session. So you've seen glimpses, but the coaches want to see trust and consistency. And I just don't think, based on anybody I've talked to, that either one of those issues is where they want it to be, or either one of those traits, I should say, is where the staff wants it to be.
Yeah. I think the more that I think about this, right, I think that people expecting it to be kind of wrapped up by now, I think we kind of forget, we just went from, and when I say we, I mean Notre Dame fans, like people who take in Notre Dame content, they went from Sam Hartman to Riley Leonard, seasoned quarterbacks, right? And so I think that they look at the competition now, and it's like, okay, CJ Carr and or Kenny Mincchi, like they're going to make the progression that those seniors made. That's not how it works, right? Like these guys have not been in a competitive situation like this, where it's like, yeah, they're fighting for jobs, but they know they're not going to be the starter. This is very different. Every day they wake up, they're trying to win a job. Every day they wake up, they have to be on point and they have to be ready to go. I mean, look, it shows in the fact that CJ Carr is feeling antsy in the stretching lines. It's like, I got to do something. Like that's producing a new kind of feeling in your body, and you don't know how they're going to react to that stuff. They do need to get it worked out, right? And we don't know that it will. Maybe it won't, right? This happens a lot in college football as well. Notre Dame's got to kind of nurse their quarterbacks along in the first couple of weeks and find a way to win a game. But long-term projection, I don't know that I'm concerned about that. This is just the nature of college football, especially when you're not going into the portal for a quarterback. Would you kind of, how do you take in that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Look, you've got to deal with a little bit of pain right now on the quarterback derby, so to speak. But I can't stress this enough. This is a critical moment for Notre Dame to stay a national title contender with a program that can truly take that next step, because Notre Dame's finally positioned to have stability at that position. I've made this comment several times on some other podcasts and radio appearances to where people laugh at it at this point, Greg, but this is going to be the 6th consecutive season that Notre Dame has had a different starting quarterback. And I don't think that can be stressed enough that that's got to stop. And now it's positioned to stop, and it's positioned to flourish. And I think that's the next step, because Marcus Freeman and company have built an absolute hell of a roster. I love this roster, and particularly on defense, especially if they can upgrade on the defensive interior, and they are moving forward. You finally have a defense, as it was pointed out to me, they look the most like Alabama and Georgia that a Notre Dame defense has arguably looked since the Lou Holtz era, when they were kind of selecting players instead of recruiting players. And I think that's where they're at. And so the next step is having a top-end quarterback that you have in your program for more than 1 year. Oh, and by the way, they're positioned for great stability at offensive coordinator, which is something Marcus Freeman hasn't had. This is the first time he's had the same offensive coordinator in back-to-back seasons. Oh, and also, by the way, it's the first time he's taking the same strength and conditioning coach into back-to-back seasons, because Bayless abruptly left right before the start of the 23 season, and then they had an interim that year, and then Lauren Lando was hired last January. So I think all of those are important things to consider. But yeah, it is the world, and everybody has growing pains. And look, hey, Alabama is in a quarterback situation right now where it's probably going to be Ty Simpson to start the season. And I love Ty Simpson. I'm friends with his dad, the UT Martin head football coach. But it may not be Ty Simpson all year long.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's kind of a point that I've made. It's like we need to be mindful of how both of them are playing, because anything can happen, especially when you have quarterbacks who haven't played in a very long time. But Notre Dame's, their roster is definitely in a healthy place. John, sometimes it's hard for us to get our bodies into a healthy place, especially as we get older. And what do you do about that, right? You need to find a recreation, something that you can do to get moving around. If you're in the Mishawaka area, you can go with H2 Pickleball. You can start a pickleball hobby, John Brice. Of course, that's been founded by alum Todd Hill, and he's teaming with fellow alums Jack Gibbs and Will Howells, a top 10 pickleball pro, to bring Notre Dame fans the Notre Dame Pickleball Crew League. Besides football, what better way to connect and engage Notre Dame fans than through pickleball? Membership is free, and members will have access to special pickleball events and discounts. The first event will be a tournament before the Purdue game with medal rounds played on campus. A portion of the proceeds will go to the Rockne Athletics Fund to support our student athletes. Contact Todd at h2pickleball.com or 574-339-5195 to join the league. And be sure to visit the H2 Pickleball facility in Mishawaka when you are in town. H2 Pickleball is located at 55801 Evergreen Plaza Drive, Mishawaka, Indiana.
Yeah, I think my wife has utilized that to play some pickleball with her father over the course of this summer earlier this year. And then shout out to Justin Indy Sniper. The hat is from the Paiute Golf Course in Las Vegas. I'm not a very good golfer. I aspire to be, and I've only played golf at one course in Vegas, but it was the Paiute course, and I love it, and I would recommend it.
There you go. Paiute. If you're ever in the Las Vegas area, check it out. All right. Helping out the quarterbacks. Speaking of the quarterbacks in the offense, there needs to be an upgrade at the wide receiver position, John Brice, and Notre Dame's hoping to get that. We've heard some things about Malachi Fields. I posted a picture of him going up top. There's a lot of I don't want to say hope. There's a lot of vibes, I guess, going towards the Malachi Fields situation. What can you talk to us about him and then the rest of the wide receiver room?
Yeah, vibes is a good word. I would say confidence is the big word. Notre Dame is confident that Malachi Fields is going to be a difference maker for the Irish this year. That's been hammered home to me over the last 10 days, hammered home to me multiple times this week. The dude is probably Notre Dame's most physical specimen and gifted receiver since Chase Claypool, and that's the body type that I comp him to, except I think he might be even more physically impressive than Claypool was in his breakout season that made him a second-round draft pick. Like, he looks really, really good. Are you talking about the picture you posted where he's going up in the stadium or for a catch, or is it? It
was the stadium scrimmage. It was over Mark Zachary. It was from the video that they posted. I just pulled a screen grab.
Yeah, exactly. No, I've seen that same image, and I'm glad you used it because people particularly have talked to me about that catch. I also watched him myself. I'm trying to remember who was in coverage that day, but it was over the middle, and the guy was draped on him, probably would have been flagged in a game. Fields still made the catch and then quickly turned upfield. So I don't want to overhype a guy, but I'm not, because of how much people are hyping him to me on campus, and it's a lot. They're really, really excited. Direct quote to me this week was, "John, I'm telling you, he's going to be a good one for us."
That's obviously very much needed for Notre Dame. And you need it for the quarterbacks, to have that boundary guy that you can just kind of throw the ball up to, take a one-on-one opportunity. I think Bo Collins did a little bit of that last year, but I think they want a little bit more out of that boundary receiver, and hopefully they can get that out of Malachi Fields. Irish one's asking about Will Pauling. Heard great things about Will Pauling, apparently really impressive. Do you have anything on what Will Pauling's been able to bring so far?
Yeah. First of all, listen to what Marcus Freeman said, and he couldn't brag on him enough in talking to us on the opening day of preseason camp. There 8 days ago, 9 days ago, whenever it was, they all run together. But the other thing is, I think he's really pretty firmly gotten himself into the top 4 of Notre Dame's wideout. He's showing a real veteran savvy and understanding of the game. And I think that might be, reading between the lines, one of the biggest moves that Malachi Fields has made is like his dedication in the playbook and in the offense is taking the next step for him that matches up with all his physical traits. So Will Pauling is another one that they just love the way he plays the game. Very savvy, very much a veteran who's seen a lot of stuff, and proving to be very, very reliable, which again, it all ties into the quarterback. And when we hear the word trust and consistency, that's what they're looking for there. That's what they're getting from some of these guys at these other positions when they're able to make a play or do what is asked of them. And sometimes it's not having the ball in their hand.
Yeah. When we were talking yesterday about what we were going to discuss on this show, you mentioned Greathouse been a little banged up, but it seems like he's going to be all right. What's the latest on him?
Yeah, I think held out of practice. They're they got to put the shells on last weekend and probably had a little bit more physicality there, so it might have been a bump, but indicated to me nothing concerning long term whatsoever on Jaden Greathouse, and back on the practice field sooner rather than later. I think we get a chance to see some stuff in a couple of days. So I'm sure me and Matt Freeman and Mike Frank and Tim O'Malley and Tim Priest, everybody else will be looking to make sure Greathouse is out there. But it was indicated to me he'll be back out there much sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think Matt put on his update, I think he took kind of a shot. I don't want to say dirty shot or anything. It's a football game. From Drake Bowen, there was something over the middle, maybe a little head thing going on. Just held him out. Hopefully he's back out there. Nothing that we would, seem to be any concerning. Anything else on the wide receivers that you've kind of been hearing? I know, not specific to any question in the chat or anything, just kind of where you're at with it. I know Elijah Burris, Matt was talking about Elijah Burris and Logan Saldate from the kind of the scrimmage over the weekend. So anything else on the wide receiver position?
Yeah, Burris continues to show up and make plays and do some good things. Faison, I think they feel like has added some really needed muscle to him, and he's been a little bit more consistent because of that. He's been able to be out there much more consistently on a day after day, down after down basis. So that's kind of where I would take the wide receiver group. Yeah.
We see Faison here. Cam Williams is interesting to me, John. I will say, like, his physical makeup has me heartened, right? Like, he's clearly put a lot of work and time into his body and everything like that. And, I think the question that I have is he going to end up being that kind of electric burner guy that he was touted as? Like, at this point in his career, the recruiting ranking is not relevant, right? You don't get extra anything for being a 5-star versus a 4-star versus whatever star. You just got to go out there and make plays. I do wonder, because I know you'd heard good things about Micah Gilbert as well. Cam Williams is working on the boundary. He's got the chances of him passing Malachi Fields in 2025 aren't very good, especially when you're hearing that he's playing really well. He's got Micah Gilbert who's playing well there. To me, there's just a there's a practical problem of you've got to pass other wide receivers. To me, it's like I want to know what he's doing in practice that is separating him from everybody else. Like, because if he's not doing the down the field explosiveness thing, then he's kind of a different prospect. And I wonder what prospect that is, like what the floor is of that and what the ceiling is of that as well, if he's not going to be the electric burner down the field. So that's kind of where I'm at with Cam Williams. Have you kind of heard anything on, not necessarily is he making a move on the depth chart, but like what is he doing in camp and what kind of camp is he having?
Yeah, well, the one thing I would hear is some evolving maturity on Cam Williams, a guy who's staying after more, catching more balls, being a bit more refined in his routes and a bit more commanding in his knowledge of the playbook. But staying after and doing some stuff like that is maybe about the only thing I've heard of note. To your point, yeah, and if Fields is healthy and he looks just, like he was carved out of granite, as long as Fields stays healthy, there's a 0% chance that Cam can pass him. What he can do is be committed, earn his coach's trust. I'm sorry to keep saying that, but earn his coach's trust and be the guy. If he becomes the number 6, 7, 8 receiver this year, then he positions himself to be in the top 4 of that group next year. And that's how I think you have to hope he can look at the big picture and take the long view approach. And that's what I think is the best case scenario for him. Yeah.
And when we talk about trust, and especially with wide receivers, how many times have we heard, this quarterback threw a pick, and then the coaches afterwards like, well, the route wasn't the depth it needed to be, or it wasn't run the proper way. It wasn't run with the proper leverage or something like that. And you can't, I think the thing that, and this frequently comes up with wide receivers, I think it goes back to like 2007 with Golden Tate, when that team couldn't do anything and it was just like Golden Tate runs straight down the field and we'll throw it to you. That's not really a thing that happens very often. And you just can't do that. No coach is going to put a player on the field if they don't believe they know exactly what they're going to do.
There you go.
And it doesn't matter how good they are. I mean, it's kind of, we saw this with Jaylen Sneed as well. You can't just throw a guy out there. It leads to touchdowns. Or it leads to interceptions that lead to turnovers that lead to touchdowns. Like it simply cannot happen. And I think when you talk about maturity, we're talking about football maturity. We're not talking about like personal social maturity. It could be a very mature kid. But when it comes to football, and this is like also like goes into the Tay Johnson conversation a little bit as well, because Tay Johnson to me is a guy who kind of came in with the same issues as Cam Williams in the sense that they didn't get the greatest coaching in high school. And so therefore there was a long way to go for them to get on the field. Tay Johnson has been able to kind of bridge that gap and show his, athletic ability on the football field, along with his knowledge of the defense quicker than Cam Williams. Now, it's not to say Cam Williams won't get there, because it's not like that, right? Not everything is linear as we would like it to be. But that's an example of like, you got to be able to bridge the gap. And what you're talking about with maturity is Cam Williams is learning how to bridge that gap. And luckily he has a guy like Malachi Fields ahead of him where he can look and see this is how it looks in a major college offense.
Yeah, because otherwise you risk, if you don't have a Malachi Fields and some veterans around him, you risk Tobias Merriweather 2.0 and having to play a guy who has some physical traits you really like, but isn't remotely ready or consistent enough. And, Rico Flores had great training out in California from a guy named Lim Adams, who's now a college coach for Sacramento State and Brennan Marion. And Jaden Greathouse had great training. And they came in, those guys came in far more advanced than your typical high school or college freshman at this kind of level. And I think that as promising as they were, there was hope that Cam Williams would come in immediately like that. And they're just different players with different backgrounds. And I think you make a great point of noting that Cam had a greater distance to travel. And I'm trying to make that point that, like, Jaden Greathouse came in, and I talked to people in Texas, and they were like, this guy will look like a third-year player in college from day one. And I still contend that he is probably the most pure wide receiver in the Notre Dame receiving corps. That doesn't mean he's the most top-end physically gifted. He's incredibly physically gifted and has really continued to lean out and carve out his body and his frame. But from a technique and everything else standpoint, he's one of the better ones, not just at Notre Dame, but I would contend technically he's an elite college football wide receiver.
Yeah. Like the things that I'm looking for with Cam is like, is he getting better at the things that he needs to get better at aside from the actual depth chart and getting into the game? I felt very similar about Xavier Watts when he first made the move over to defense. It's like you have to learn how to be a defensive player. And for me, it was, is he getting better at all those little things? Because that shows me, like you can't be good at the big stuff without being good at the little stuff, you know?
I love that. Actually, I used this quote on a podcast yesterday. You know, I covered Tennessee for a long time, including the year that Lane Kiffin was there, and Monty Kiffin was his defensive coordinator. And Monty Kiffin's favorite phrase to say was, if you see a little, you see a lot. If you see a lot, you don't see anything. And so It's kind of like what you alluded to earlier, like the coaches are grading positives and negatives, not necessarily the outcome. And that was Monty Kiffin's point, was like, if you're seeing a little, then you're seeing a lot because you're noticing the details. You're latching onto those. You're doing the things that you have to do play after play, day after day to be successful. And again, like to your point, I think a generic way of saying it and a phrase I use, like X Watts was just a football player. Jaden Greathouse is just a football player. Tay Johnson, Drake Bowen, these guys are just natural football players.
Yeah. And that's what, that's what you want to bring into your program. So we've been talking a lot all off season about what can they do with Jeremiah Love in the slot and in all those other things. Jamie talked about, and he wrote an article about, the two backs and what they've got there. And, he said, I wouldn't have written it, but for the fact that Notre Dame showed it so much on the first day. Mm-hmm. Is this, in your view, is this like a real thing? Just of absolutely just they are going to use Jeremiah Love in every single way possible. He is the most dangerous player on their team. How excited should people be about this?
Yeah, you'll always wonder exactly how much they're going to deploy him as a slot, but I would say a few things point to it being a real thing, not just how much we saw it on day one, because they knew we were out there day one.
Yeah.
They knew they were letting us watch the whole practice, so don't ever underestimate coaches showing something because they want the media to talk about it. They want to make all 12 guaranteed opponents read all these headlines. Holy smokes, Jeremiah Love was lined up in the slot. And I have Jeremiah Smith on the tip of my tongue because, to your point about him being Notre Dame's most explosive player, I would contend that Jeremiah Love and Jeremiah Smith and then Ryan Williams at Alabama, I think those are the three most explosive players in college football right now. Those are the top three for me. And so when you talk about Jeremiah Love being elite, he's not elite just for Notre Dame. He's elite anywhere in the country. A few things, though, make me think that it's real. And number one would be, I looked this up yesterday, the growth of Mike Denbrock's offense, particularly as it pertained to the red zone from year one to year two at LSU. And, yeah, he had some cat named Jaden Daniels triggering the offense. But they went from around 50th in red zone scoring year one to 20th in year two, climbed from 14th in touchdown percentage to 9th in touchdown percentage year two. So I think the consistency of having Denbrock for a second year empowers more growth in the Notre Dame offense, especially when you bring back the entire offensive line, more or less. You bring back so many key skill guys, and you bring back essentially your entire offensive backfield in terms of running backs. And so I think all of those things, Denbrock, and this is a staff committed to putting the best 11 on the field. We've heard them say it a number of times. And then also Juwan Sider comes in. He has a lot of two-back history. And we were talking about it yesterday, and Pete Sampson had looked it up, and I think Penn State was 9th in the country last year for how much it used the 2-pack set.
Yeah.
So I think there are a number of signs there that lead you to believe it wasn't just to get the media to write about it. It is something they like, and it's something that Jeremiah Love likes because he's gone to train and he's been intentional about what he can do to take the next step. And I think the Alvin Kamara comps that we hear sometimes whispered and sometimes mentioned aloud, and I covered Kamara at Tennessee, they loved him. They split him out a lot. They ran him out of the backfield a lot. They used him on a lot of wheel routes. And if you get your quarterback situation nailed down and you grow that chemistry with Love being in some different spots, it only opens up the entire field for everyone else.
Yeah, that's a good call on Kamara because I kind of feel like they kind of run similar too. Jeremiah Love's bigger, so that's something. There's a power element to him that is there. But I mean, he's just one of those guys. Like, you got to get the most out of him. You have something as good as this. Will you ever have it again? You don't know. You got to get the most out of them. Just like you got to get the most out of your social media page or your small business, John. And if you're going to do that, you need a media company that can help you do that. And that, of course, is going to be VSR Media, founded by Notre Dame football pregame host and Emmy Award-winning anchor Vahid Sadrazadeh. VSR Media provides professional and cinematic video and photo. Whether you're looking for a collegiate or pro-level highlight reel, have a personal story to tell, or aiming to diversify and grow your business, VSR Media specializes in short and long form video storytelling, social media management, and website design. VSR Media also captures professional headshots, senior and sports photos. Contact them at vsrmediacompany.com. Mention Irish Sports Daily to receive 20% off your first project. Visit them online or give them a call at 574-800-9106. Last thing before we get going, John. There's been a lot of talk about Notre Dame, their roster, and how improved it is. You just look at the team photo and you just think, man, there's a lot of dudes on this team. You've covered a ton of college football teams. You've looked at, covered Tennessee extensively. You do a lot of work in the SEC. You know about SEC rosters. You know about big time rosters. In your mind at this point, where does Notre Dame's roster stack up?
I contend that the only thing Notre Dame has to land is it's got to get a top 40 pick on the defensive interior. Otherwise, I love Notre Dame's offensive line room. The entire room is probably as good as anywhere in college football. There's not a lot of difference there in any sort of O-line factory you want to name. The skill position, especially at running back. We haven't talked about Kairen Young. That doesn't sound like good news at all. But still, that's a great running back room with the other four there, plus Nolan James, the rookie. Wide receivers have gotten much better. And, you're being supplemented this year by 2 transfers that you'll just get for 1 year. But I do like Micah Gilbert. I think it was Irish One had a question. I do like Micah Gilbert. KK Smith has shown some stuff. Now, he had that costly drop that I alluded to on day one, but he was nice in spring. He's healthy. I think he's positioned to take a next step. Logan Saldate is really good. I like him at the slot. And then I've referenced Burris. I think Bettis is a little better than some people might have thought when they first got him. And he was consistent in spring. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him playing on special teams and kind of becoming a core teams guy that has a chance to grow an offensive role in years 2 or 3 that he's at Notre Dame. Defensively, again, that's an SEC linebacking unit. That's an Ohio State linebacking unit. That's a Penn State linebacking unit. And, I like probably Notre Dame's roster 1 through 100 better than, say, in Oregon. And you couldn't say that in recent years, in my opinion. But I do for sure. I think they've upgraded it really everywhere. But defensive tackle, so many games are won and lost there. I would contend Ohio State won a national title in large part because of its defensive tackles and really its D-line. And that's the next step for me for Notre Dame. Like when Notre Dame has a guy that NFL scouts are wanting to talk about because they're going to invest a first-day pick on him, then I think that's a big next step for Notre Dame's roster. That's the only one for me. And then I think that they've got great potential lockdown at the kicker position where it might not have to be a portal free agent that they keep signing year after year. in the Schmidt kid. I hear really, really good things about him. Also had it pointed out to me, like, hey, he's a real athlete. Like, he's 6'2", 210. He'll hit you. Like, so I think there's real encouragement there. Now, he's done all three things in the past, so I think they hope he'll kind of specialize and hone in there. But the fact that he's done all three things in the past in this day and age also might ultimately, if you don't worry about him wearing out his leg, could allow you to spend some money elsewhere in this new era of college football.
Yeah, that's like those little things are important. So, get the D tackle, get the and of course hit at the quarterback.
Yeah, and I think they're positioned to hit at the quarterback for sure.
Perfect.
Yeah, but it's D tackle. Get an absolute donkey for D tackle, a guy that look. I mean, Georgia won back-to-back titles because it's defense, but really it's D line, and then it just had kind of a true game manager at the quarterback position. I don't think Notre Dame has a game manager in either C.J. Carr or Kenny Mincchi. I think their ceilings are greater than a game manager label.
That's a good point. They are not that, in my opinion. That's a really good point on that. He's the John Brice at the Football Scoop. At John Brice 1 on Twitter. Football Scoop, he also contributes for Irish Illustrated. Thank you for being here. Everyone loves it when you're here. I love it when you're here. It's always a fun conversation. So we'll have to have you on again soon.
That works. I don't know when you're coming to the Bend this fall for a game, but I hope that we'll see you then, depending on your schedule and my schedule and all of that stuff.
Yeah, it's looking like Boise State now. It was going to be Texas A&M, but soccer messed up everything, so it looks like it's going to be Boise State. So hopefully we can catch up then. We'll make it happen. So all right, thank you everyone for tuning in today. If you like what you heard, hit the like, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, so whatever it is, we are going live. Jamie and I will be back on, I think, Monday. We're going to do the power hour time slot because Mike is busy out in South Bend, so we'll be doing that Monday, then Tuesday, Thursday. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Keep hitting and hustling.